to the demand planning module. Now there's built-in integration functionality, so you can set up the time of day at which you want to forecast or the data sent across. There's, as you'll see in the demo here, we'll talk about the return leg of bringing the demand planning functionality back. All of this runs within our secure perimeter from a data security standpoint. We're on the home screen here, and what you can see is kind of a heat map that looks at the two dimensions, the ABC classifications and the XYZ. ABC refers to kind of the Pareto curve of which items have the biggest impact from the standpoint of the volume of revenue or sales or units sold in your environment. A, B, and C is a very typical designation. We also have XYZ, which looks at how much variation are we encountering? Because obviously the more variation we see in the demand patterns of items, the more we need to be focused on that, because items with high variation are going to have more challenges in terms of forecast accuracy than those with lower variation. That's very logical, makes all the sense in the world. So you've got the ability to kind of understand where your items fall within that spectrum. The forecast navigator is kind of the basic dimension. We're going to look at items by a range of different dimensions. We can see all of our SKUs. By scrolling down, you can generate a range of different views that you'd want. I'm going to use 6-pack 2-liter bottles as the product category that we're going to be forecasting around. Each of the items will show its actual forecast. What you see here in blue is the actual demand history in the solid lines over the past 2 years on a weekly basis. We've done this in a weekly basis. You can do it bi-monthly if you wish, but we believe weekly forecasting gives more accuracy. So the blue data is the historical demand. What you also see is the dotted line indicates the actual demand forecast that the logic of the software is building, and you can see it matches rather tight correlation to what the actual demand pulses were. Not always in the same, but close. And it's starting to get the intelligence of what that forward-looking then projection is going to be. We can cursor through the different items and see how their demand patterns have evolved. And you'll see that those trends kind of indicating here. One, you can see this one is showing increasing demand in general. So you see that pattern repeating as we go forward here. Each of the items has got a recommended algorithm being used for it because it is the best fit for that demand pattern. It gives us the highest confidence. Yes, you can choose different of these if you wish, but we highly recommend that you allow the system to do that work for you because you're going to get better results. When you do this, you have the ability to bring in collaborative input. So let's say we know that in week 43 of the year, we're going to have a big impact. So we're going to see 100,000 unit spike in demand on this item in that week. And it's shooting up the week 43 forecast substantially here by 100,000 units. Now, typically, you're not going to do this at the item level. I'm doing this to just illustrate kind of the concept here. But when we go to then the forecast edition, which is the category level forecast, what we're going to see is that there's been a collaborative input provided against that SKU. We're going to look at the pack size of 6-pack 2 liters, and you can see there's an impact here in week 43 reflecting this adjustment that we made in that forecast. So now we're not typically going to forecast at the item level, but we want to show the correlation of those. I'm going to go ahead and revert this out. And so now we're forecasting. You can see here, we've taken away that adjustment. We're going to make the adjustment instead at the category level because we know that there's a promotional campaign coming up. You can see over here on the right that we are forecasting at the material type level. That is because we chose that as our point of aggregation. We can choose to aggregate at any different number of these dimensions that we've added in. We could do by location and then material type, or by material type and then location. I've just chosen, for simplicity's sake, this one dimension here for the demonstration, but it's forecasting by product category, because we have found in this demo environment that our products segments really run down the segment dimension more than they do the location dimension. That people are either, going to go after the 6-pack 2 liters, or they're buying 12 packs, or whatever the scenario may be. Now, if we want, we can enter an adjustment. Let's say we're going to take that campaign we had just talked about here in week 43, and we're going to modify that and make it a much, much bigger event. We're going to say we're going to sell 500,000 units in that week based on our market intelligence. Maybe there's a retail chain that we're working with, and that forecast is now going to trickle back down to the item level. So if we come back down now to the forecast navigator, we'll see that each of these items has their share of that forecast adjustment, and we can cursor through each of these as we go through, and you'll see that they're each getting their own impact on it. In some cases, it's more visible than others. Obviously, here's rather substantial share of that is coming at this item level, and it's doing it again based on the intelligence of the solution and generating those forecasts down at the item level. Now, this is important because we started the presentation talking about agility and resilience, and the idea that we're trying to configure how we operate our supply chain to be able to absorb these variations. So when we get this kind of an input of a 500,000 unit promotional event, what we should care about isn't so much that every item is going to be changing that much. We should care about which of the items is this promotional event going to impact, because it's not perhaps going to be every item in the portfolio. Some of them may have plenty of inventory and we don't need to make any adjustments for them. Others, in fact, may have many other issues that we need to deal with. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go back over to the Intuiflow side here, and I'm going to open up the S&OP module as an additional tab. And we're going to go to the Promotional tab for the 6-pack 2 liters at the bottling location. And you'll see that we've got some forecasted demand that is kind of becoming a bit volatile. We're measuring this based on a set of thresholds that we've established in our environment. Again, we're thinking exception management. To build agility, our system should be able to handle all the ups and downs that happen normally. We shouldn't be too obsessed with trying to adjust for all those. Instead, what we should be doing is looking for where there are exceptions. So here in the Promotional tab, we're looking for demands in a week that are 2 times the average weekly demand, or 3 times the average weekly demand, or 5 times. Because if they fall in those categories, they're likely going to have an impact to us on our inventory levels and may require certain adjustments that we need to deal with. Now, this is the view for the 6-pack 2 liters. That's the category that we implemented this campaign against in week 43. What we're now going to do, this view is before we made that adjustment in our demand plan. We're going to send that data back over onto the Intuiflow side. And it's going to call through the API. The job is going to transmit that information back across over to Intuiflow. This won't take a very long time at all. And now that data is coming back over onto the S&OP side of our solution. We're going to go ahead now and we're going to refresh the view, and we're going to now update our S&OP plan because we've gotten this update to our demand plan brought in. And if you notice there in the Promotional tab, there's going to be an impact to it on the week 43 as it comes across. It's going to take us just a second to let this thing run. But the idea here as we go back to the presentation is let's build agility. Let's look at, hey, there may be a campaign coming up some weeks into the future. Let's make adjustments if and where needed. If it's not that big of an event that we need to make changes to our operating model, then we can let that just kind of run its course and we'll be fine because we've built in that flexibility. For the sake of this illustration, we're trying to make it a little more dramatic so you can see that there may be an impact there that we would need to counteract. So about done. Okay, so we'll go to the 6-pack 2 liter promotion. So that now we're looking at the campaign and going to see the impact here. And what you can see is 436,000 of that fell into the bottler location. If we remove the bottler location, you'll see the 500,000 units that we're talking about here. Now, this is sort of based on the criticality of demands in other locations. But if we look at just this week of October 23rd, we can see many of the items are going to be impacted by that. So if we go back to our save view here, we can see the portion of that is impacting the bottling location. And we can see here that there is a big demand. It's amounting to pretty much a 367% change to our average weekly demand. And that's obviously a big impact that we may have to correlate and take corrections to. Here you can see the projected demand at the item level. And if we cursor through the different items, we'll see the impact of this promotional campaign SKU by SKU, and we would want to make adjustments for this. And this is, again, part of this idea. Let's look at where we need to adjust. There may be other weeks during the year where our forecast is not causing us any major challenges, so we don't need to make adjustments. And we can utilize the functionality of our S&OP module to create adjustments to pre-build for this campaign. We're going to come back to those here in a minute, but I just wanted to make the connection between the demand planning adjustments that we made at the category level and how they could have an impact on how we're going to operate in that period. Now, there's some other dimensions in the demand planning module we wanted to share. First of all, is this concept of dashboards. The dashboards are there to give us a visibility to how well are we tracking against our forecast and how do we look as we go out into the future. We haven't loaded a budget in here, and we can take, this is a look in aggregate. We can take a look at each of the different dimensions by product category. This is the one that we're looking at right now. You can see this big collaborative adjustment that we've made going forward. What we can then also do is add and load in our budget data. And this would allow us to then track against our budget performance, obviously see the variances between forecast and actual demand, but also get a sense of how are we performing against the budgets at each of these category levels. There's a set of reports that are also available. This is one that's a sales forecast, and it's looking at, we'll show you the details behind here. We're looking at the items in price context. So in other words, units times the average selling price would indicate the expected sales volume. You have the option in here to look at it in units, in price, in cost, in profit. So quite a bit of flexibility from a reporting standpoint to get different insights about your items. We're looking at the 6-pack 2 liters. We can edit and create as many different reports as we'd like to have to see how our forecast looks going out into the future. Next on the list will be the KPIs. And this is, I think, really important because it gets us into the mode of understanding how are we doing from a forecast accuracy standpoint. You can see we're measuring our average error in percents and in units. There are 4 different ways that we can assess our error percent, bias percent, and then accuracy percent. We have different lag periods that we can evaluate. And this goes back to how accurate are we looking back? If we looked back 2 weeks, how accurate was that forecast versus the actual results 3 weeks back, 4 weeks back? And this lag analysis is quite useful in terms of the forecast and demand planning discipline becoming more accurate. At the item level, we'll again go back to our 6-pack 2 liters. We can see those dimensions across the different weeks of the forecast, measure their variance. This is standardized demo data, so it's not moving around the way I'd like it to, but I think you can get the illustration of that. Notice the value added row here. And this is where if we had these collaborative inputs in there, we would see the difference between the Intuiflow forecast, which is the system generated forecast, and the user forecast, which is where the collaborative inputs come in. Because they're both the same, I'm not leaving any adjustments in the demo data. You don't get to see the forecast value add. But this is to me, a very critical part of the solution. It's helping us gauge how accurate is our forecasting. And while we are advocates of putting the right level of effort into getting good forecasts, we also believe that there's a diminishing law of return here, that you can actually become too focused on trying to make this perfect and become counterproductive. And I'll go back to my IBM days and profess I was one of these who was always trying to get those outlooks to be perfect. And it's really not the right thing to do. You want to get them good enough, close enough that they represent a reasonable representation of what your future is going to be. Use that to test the flexibility and the agility and the resilience of your operating model through the S&OP module that we were just showing you a second ago, and then make adjustments where appropriate, but not pervasively. We should be able to lighten the load of supply chain planning if we follow this discipline and recognize that it's not so much about a consensus demand plan, but getting a consensus supply plan and all the stars and planets are all aligned perfectly. Let's focus instead on using our demand planning to help influence testing the flexibility of our operating model, because that will lead us towards more agility and resilience, which I think no one would argue isn't a top priority here. So KPIs, very, very critical. You can look at it around all the different dimensions that you want to look at. I'm doing it by pack size because that's how we set up the demonstration. And then the dashboards and reports also kind of enhance that functionality. So kind of from the demand planning, those were the major points we wanted to illustrate. You can see the system forecast versus the user forecast. You can actually load external forecasts in, and you would see them fall into that collaboration line in the Navigator, where when we're looking at the various items, you would see what the forecast adjustments would be. You have the ability in Intuiflow now to make adjustments to your demand history, to trim outliers. You also have facilities within the platform to do that as well. One of the other things that's key to it is this concept of collaboration. And let's say that there's a certain items in our portfolio that we want to delegate collaboration to. We can give that collaboration out to members of our team. And this would give Bernard Million the ability to forecast those items within the portfolio. We can also do this up here in our sharing rules. And here we can kind of more administer this and, okay, Bernard, we're going to give you the ability to, forecast all of the items in the material type or contains, 6-pack, and confirm that kind of delegation of responsibilities around the organization. Many companies have different philosophies about this, so I think the good thing about the way the platform is developed is that it's very flexible and allows you to determine where you want your collaboration points to be in the logic, i.e. segments of locations, product segments, any user-defined fields that you want to utilize. You've got a whole range of different ways of generating that. And then within that context, leveraging out the collaboration input to the appropriate members of the team so that they can play that role in that part of the process as well. So to kind of finish up here, just one last thing. Once we bring these adjustments back, we can then come in and make use of the idea of creating intelligent adjustments within the platform. And what will happen now is that the system will go through and regenerate its forecast, or the forecasted scenario, if you will, to try to correlate to that substantial promotional event that we had of the 500,000 units for the 6-pack 2 liters. Some of the items will need adjustments, others may not, because if they have more than enough inventory to cover that or share their share of that event, then obviously we don't need to pre-build. Whereas other items may require that, and the system helps generate that insights for us and allows us to build an adjusted supply plan to address the changes in our forecast. So we'll wait just a little longer here for this to complete. And what you'll see is when we get into this, you're going to see that there are going to be items that have buffer adjustments being recommended by the software. Those would then be updated if needed as we go forward and as the forecast changes. But they really take and bring a level of automation to this whole process that oftentimes isn't available in other systems. We're about done. Okay. So, great. So we'll look at our projections now. And what you're going to see here, no real impact on this item. That there was, there's a small adjustment here, but it was not as substantial as it might have been in some of the other items. Here we're going to see a projection, and this one did have a bigger impact. And you can see that the buffer size is being updated now, and it's correcting for the inventory level, which is under pressure here. Got to move that cursor there, but you can see in the left side of the chart that the yellow zone size has increased. And this helps us bring that pre-build into effect, allows us to make sure that that item has been addressed. There are some other spikes coming down the road in the periods of demand as we would have seen in some of the other items. So we're able to connect the dots, make the adjustment on our demand plan in the demand planning module, see the correlated impact as to where it impacts our stock positions, where we may need to make some corrective adjustments, knowing that there will be many items that may not require adjustments, really allowing us to make our S&OP process a bit lighter to play through and more responsive to the actual goals that we should have in mind of creating more agility and resilience into our platform. So with that, I'm going to stop. I'm going to jump over here just to the final couple slides that we had in the deck. What we think we're creating here is something that's more intuitive, easy to use, provides the demand planning functionality that we're looking for, enables through those KPIs the ability to help you improve your forecast accuracy. And again, with the coaching being, let's try to keep that in balance so that we're not obsessing with getting to that level. We're able now to utilize forecast-based planning in the software for specific items where appropriate, but also we believe it will help us tune the buffering and the DDMRP dimensions of our platform to really address those forecasted requirements, very much in line with the concept of what a demand-driven adaptive enterprise should be doing. So with that, I'm going to stop and see if we have any questions to address.
We do. Thank you, Erik. The first one we have is, are there any other modules from Intuiflow required to use demand planning?
Yeah, that's a good question. So from the standpoint of the software, we provide this with the material planning solution because they kind of go hand in hand. So we are, for a customer that wants to license the demand planning, we would bundle in the material planning functionality with that and offer that as a solution in that right. Because a lot of the master data that's coming into the demand planning functionality is really housed in the material planning side of it, your part dimensions, your part attributes, your demand history, those aspects, and they kind of round out the solution from that standpoint.
Okay, another one coming in. Can it apply an automatic planned adjustment in the buffers when the software projects a stock out because of a promotion?
Absolutely. That's kind of the illustration that we just went through, that we made a big promotional campaign, as you saw in the forecast edition here, the aggregation level forecast on the 6-pack 2 liters. We carried that over to the S&OP module, allowed it to generate the initial view, where we saw some significant inventory exposures in those buffer trend graphs. And then we had the ability to generate the intelligent adjustments to counteract that promotional event. Some of those products didn't need as much adjustment as others. So the great news was that the system was doing that work for us.
Okay, thank you, Erik. We got questions flooding in. Can we run demand planning and use the output directly into an FDU value?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, there's a setting in our software that you're able to generate your buffer zone values based on what's called forecasted daily usage. And so yes, when the forecast comes back from the demand planning into the Intuiflow side, it is generating those FDU values for the items. And that also includes exploding that forecasted demand down to the child components so that the child components have their own forecast, if you will.
Okay, another one for you, Eric. Can it adjust the forecast using external factors automatically if my forecast depends of it? Exchange rate, international prices, etc.
Yes, there's a lot of et ceteras in there, so I want to be careful with each one. We probably want to talk through it specifically with whoever asked that question. But yes, you can bring in an external forecast. Oftentimes, that's going to be at a customer level. For example, we will be getting to the point where we can have different demand history based on um, customer. For example, let's say I'm a company and I'm selling through big box retailers as well as on Amazon, et cetera. You would have views of what your customer demand is by segment and be able to import those in as collaborative inputs based on that segment. Or you can bring it in, if you are an example would be automotive industry, where you're getting a rolling forecast of requirements from the tier above you, the OEMs as an example. You could use that as an external forecast, and that could be evaluated against the system generated forecast that the demand planning module is creating.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Another one for you. My team is new to concepts of forecasting and demand planning. What kind of training is needed to get started, or do you provide it?
Great question. Yes, there is functionality in the solution here that allows us to give you the help you need. If you go over here, you'll see a question mark here. Let me do this. I think it'll pop up. And you can see tours of the different features within the software. So you can walk through each step of the process, and it will illustrate what you're learning and give you coaching on that. So as you're becoming more familiar with the software, I need to move my Zoom thing. Hang on. It will walk you through a tutorial, allows you to learn the concepts of how the software works. Demand planning is a bit of a discipline, and there's quite a bit of literature out there. One of the collaborators with us through SKU Science is a gentleman named Nicholas Van de Putte, who has written now 3 books and has a very modern set of ideas around demand planning. So 2 answers to the question. There's a lot of native functionality already in the software. Again, going back to the point that their whole concept from the beginning was allow clients to be able to self-enable, right? Tutorials within the software, a lot of great online education within the platform that you can access. If you want to go beyond that, though, you can go to get external education. Nicholas's books are excellent. We've run his demand planning training with our staff as part of our launch of this product. The training was excellent. So there's multiple ways here that you can get spec'd up. Many people will find that they can get started very reliably on their own. Then obviously, as they want to start to make more, kind of power user understanding of the platform and the concepts, there's education available for that as well.
All right, looks like we have one more. If we forecast at the regional warehouse level, can we expand and sum those forecasts down to the plant level?
Okay, if I understand the question right, we're forecasting at the forward location level, the warehouse level. Let's say we have 5 warehouses around the country, and we're trying to understand the impact that that's going to have at the plant that's producing the product. The forecast would be generated out at the forward location level. That can then be consolidated back to the plant through the bills of material relationships we would set up in the Intuiflow platform, where the item at the forward location is the parent to the child at the plant. And so obviously, if you had 5 locations in the forward regions, and they all had, were utilizing that part from the plant, you would be consolidating the forecast from 5 different forward locations onto the requirements at the plant location. Yes.
All right, and another one came in. A higher level question. Could you discuss the dividing line between Intuiflow and a typical MES system? Any overlap or common interfaces?
Say the question again. I think it's between an MES system, which is a little not in the demand planning space. So
Yes, that's what he said. I'll read it again. A higher level question. Could you discuss the dividing line between Intuiflow and a typical MES system? Any
yes.
overlap or common interfaces?
Yes. So Intuiflow, it has a functionality called scheduling and execution, which includes the ability to track and progress work orders on the shop floor the way a normal MES would. It's not as complete as a typical, bespoke MES solution would be. Oftentimes, when we've deployed our scheduling functionality within Intuiflow in a client that has a robust MES, they're going to be utilizing that MES and interfacing into data in Intuiflow back and forth as a way of kind of linking those two together. So there's sets of APIs that help coordinate that and integrate the data in an effective way. There's a lot of tracking and MES functionality in the Intuiflow platform already, but it's kind of a client-by-client decision as to whether we're going to retain their MES functionality. If it's all got barcode scanning and all that kind of functionality, they're typically going to want to retain that platform and utilize it in concert with the rest of the functionality that Intuiflow provides.
All right, that looks like all the questions. Thank you, everyone, for submitting
Awesome.
things.
So thanks for all those questions. Very much appreciate your attention and listening in today. I think that there is a great synergy here from a demand planning standpoint. Again, we are focused on helping clients create agility. The demand-driven philosophies that we are very strong advocates of get complemented when we bring in demand planning and utilize that as a vehicle to help stress test how we operate. The ability to generate adjustments in our forecast, see them and how they're going to project and impact our production requirements, our supply requirements, the inventory levels, all of that is, I think, very, very seamless and gives great tools to users to be able to work at the project of improving their own agility. If we do that well, we're going to get better results. We've already proven time and again that demand-driven MRP as a tactic can be quite effective. We've already proven that we can do better with scheduling. So if we're using our demand planning functionality now to not only give us a better view of the future, but also one that can help us stress test our operating model, now we've got the best of both worlds because we'll be more prepared for whatever eventualities may come our way. So again, we're going to share with you the link to the recording of the webinar, as well as the presentation material from today's session. I want to thank you all for your interest. Please reach out if you're interested in following up and having a follow-up, more deep dive oriented conversation. We'd be happy to do a dedicated demo for each of you if required. And with that, we're going to adjourn the session. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.